folks, welcome back to Indaba Africa. This is Chris once again. Hey folks, welcome back to Chris Wyatt Africa. This is Chris in Central Pennsylvania, and today's special feature guest is none other than Springbok legend Joel Stransky. You might have heard of him once or twice. I'm not sure. Maybe if you watch Rugby and Cats broadcasting, or maybe from the business world. But for those of you that got a longer memory, not to make either of us look old, he is actually younger than I am, but those that have a long memory, you might remember this oak from the 1995 Rugby World Cup, when the Springboks were brought back from the oblivion of sports banning, and they competed in less than 3 years. They won a World Cup on the strength of team effort and this gentleman's boot. Folks, none other than Joel Stransky. Joel, hochandit, by donkey for coming on. How are you today?
Chris, good evening, and thanks very much for having me on the show. Yeah, I'm all good. I'm sitting here in just outside Durban, a place called Belito, actually on my father-in-law's farm. And if the signal is a bit bad, I do apologize. It's raining and a little overcast, and the weather's not great. But it's wonderful to be chatting all things rugby and chatting to a global audience. Thanks very much for having me.
Well, no, it's my pleasure, and it's great to have you. For those who don't know, I briefly had a chance, courtesy of a mutual friend of ours, Talon Stanford, to meet Joel at the 2019 Rugby World Cup. It was one of my highlights. It was one of those, I don't want to say bucket list, but one of those key things I wanted to do during that World Cup for the 18 matches I went to. Well, correction, Hagibis stole a match from me. I didn't get the AllBlacks and the Italians, so I got 17 matches in pool stage. But that was one. The other disappointment for me, of course, is we lost Chester just before that. He was debuting his beer out there, and really hoped to go out and have a beer with him, and unfortunately he passed away just before that, your teammate from the 95 World Cup. Speaking of that, before we get any further, we really do owe it to Springbok legends to point out that the passing of H.O. de Villiers, Henry Oswald de Villiers, who passed away at the age of 76 from the Rugby World. Springbok legend debuted around the time that you were born there, Joel. That's when he debuted as a Springbok and played for a couple of seasons there, and he was a bit of a legend, unfortunately. Hello?
So Chris, so H.O. was a great friend of mine, actually, and a mentor, and almost an older brother. You know, when I moved to Cape Town, he took me under his wing, and I became very close friends with him and his family. And he played a major role in my life. You know, so for him to have passed yesterday, very sad day. He had been ill. He'd had a brain tumor, and it was no real surprise. We weren't shocked or anything, but still a great loss. A wonderful man, the kindest, warmest man you could ever meet. And everyone called him H.O., and him and I referred to each other by our second names. I always called him Oswald, and he always called me Theodore. It's quite a funny relationship, but we always had a good chuckle about it. So he's a sad day for us, but, always nice to remember that this great man who will always be very warm in my heart.
Well, you say Oswald and Theodore. It sounds like a couple of the old gents sitting in a British theater up in the balcony commenting on a show. Oswald and Theodore. You could have had your own program. But listen, I didn't know that he played such a key role in your life. So my condolences to you on losing a personal friend like that. I mean, the Springbok world has lost a legend, but condolences to you on the loss. As you said, we knew he was ill, and these things unfortunately come. It's the nature of life. But still, the passing is difficult nonetheless. So, Joel.
Very much so. Very much so.
There's a lot to unpack today. I've got you for bed, at least until your Wi-Fi dies on us, maybe. So we'll see what we can get into. But you and I discussed this ahead of time, some things I want to talk about, the state of rugby and specifically South African rugby. Now, before we talk about Currie Cup, what are your thoughts on the United Rugby Championship? I was not so happy with the Guinness Pro 14 booting the Cheetahs and the Kings. And, of course, the Kings, unfortunately, went bankrupt. But I thought that was really unfair, especially the Cheetahs, because they played pretty well despite not having a very successful record. And then they brought in the other teams, and I thought that was kind of unfair. But whatever the case is, I think the inclusion of South African sides, no longer in Super Rugby, but now in URC, is an interesting development. And it's been a rough start to the year, but let's be honest, the Rona has been a big reason for that. The tour, the teams coming to South Africa, that was all messed up, and the schedule's all screwed up. So just some of your thoughts on URC. What do you think of it? Is it promising for South African rugby? Is it a good thing? What are your thoughts?
So I have mixed thoughts on the whole thing. I did love Super Rugby. I did love having the teams like the Crusaders and the Hurricanes. When the Reds were strong, New South Wales, the Waratahs. I did love the fact that we played against these top sides week in, week out, and I thought it was great for our game. But realistically, the timelines don't work for us. For us to be having games at 5 a.m. or 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning when everyone's, the kids are playing school sport on a Saturday morning. The timelines were tough, and for the players to travel across that side in particular, very difficult for them to come here for 2 weeks, tough for them. But most importantly for our players to go there for 4 weeks on a tour. It's very difficult to go and be successful in a tournament like that. So I can understand the greater move to the URC. I can understand it. It does make financial sense. It's pound euro based revenue as opposed to dollar. It works on the timelines. It's easier for the players. And I think ultimately understanding our rugby and the fact that, the rand cannot compete with the euro or the pound or the yen for that matter. There were always going to be many of our players playing in the Northern Hemisphere on the same timeline. So from a SA Rugby perspective, to follow those players, to see their their form and be able to select and pick from them, it does make a whole lot of sense. I did feel a little bit for the Cheetahs and the Kings. But having said that, this is a professional era and we have to understand the financial ramifications. The Cheetahs are a tiny little union in the central part of South Africa. They don't get big crowds. They're not a real revenue generator. The Kings have really battled. They too have not generated revenues. The teams that play in the Vodacom United Rugby Championship have to be financially stable, have to be financially strong. And I think the 4 teams that are playing there now are exactly that. Have they settled well? Have they adapted quickly? Probably not. Will they in the next couple of weeks? I do hope so. And I think in time they will become a force. And maybe not so much this year, but I do think in the next year or two, you'll see 1 or 2 of those South African teams dominating and being on the top of the table up there with the likes of Leinster and Munster.
Well, and you've kind of opened a topic I was going to bring up later, but let's just bring it up now, and that's difficulty. Listen, I mean, you're a professional sports player, professional athlete. You know that there's a narrow window, and of course, you were there at the beginning of the official professional era, not back in the days of good old boys paying people under the table in Europe. But anyway, we won't get into that historical rugby. But in the official beginning of the professional era, you were there at the beginning of that. And honestly, it's you only have a short amount of time. You don't know if you're going to get a career that goes for 2 or 3 years, or you're going to be like Victor Matfield and play till you're 75. You just don't know if that's going to happen. So you've got to make the best of it, and one can hardly blame players for going to Japan or to Europe or to France where the money's at, so that they can make a good living for themselves and their family and build something so they have something later in life. And you just can't do that in South Africa. The money isn't there, unfortunately.
So the money isn't here to sustain that many players, and I think that to your point, we only have enough funds generated by television income, because there is some ticket income that will come back when COVID goes away. That there'll be sponsorship and there'll be sweet sales and there'll be advertising, but the huge bulk of the money that comes into the game of rugby union comes in through broadcast rights, and that money is not enough to sustain 6 or 8 or 10 professional rugby teams. It's enough to sustain maybe 4. And then bear in mind, you have to sustain with the money that comes in, maybe another 10 amateur teams or semi-professional smaller union teams. You've got to sustain the development of rugby at junior level, at schoolboy level, at club level. So there's a lot of money's got to go a huge distance, and I don't think we understand that. That there's probably not enough money to do that. Having said that, though, all our teams now in this country have salary caps. Pretty much like they do in the UK, and we saw Saracens go through dramas around the salary cap a couple of seasons ago. Leicester are being investigated at the moment. It's probably a good thing in terms of limiting how much you can spend, but it does mean that, to your point, that a lot of our top players can go earn a great living overseas. They can set themselves up for life in a way where they either have time to maybe study while they're playing professionally, or they have time to at least go and learn and then buy a business or start a business, or at least have a career after rugby, as well as put enough cash aside to hopefully, I think 1 or 2 of them will probably not have to work again. But rugby doesn't play like cricket and the IPL or professional football, the Premier League. It doesn't pay that much, and particularly with the salary cap. So the guys have to think right now. They have to think about setting themselves up and looking forward to tomorrow and the thereafter, because they are going to battle to find work after rugby. When you put 12 or 15 years into one career and you have to all of a sudden switch careers, there's only so many coaching jobs. There's only so many commentating jobs. You have to find a job outside of rugby.
Absolutely, 100%. I agree with you on that. And that's the thing. For years, I've said. Now, of course, I'm sure you're familiar with the history of rugby in the U.S. A lot of people aren't. They think it's new in the U.S. It's not. We've had rugby for a long time here. It's just that it was a club level sport and a university level sport at best. It was never professional, and we didn't even have a national side until the early mid '80s. In fact, when I became, I think you were quite intrigued by me when Talon mentioned that I've been a Springbok fan since like '82, and he's like, "How is that possible?" Well, we didn't have a national side, and I'm a historian. I was at university, so I started looking, and I'm like, oh, I'm interested in Southern Africa, and South Africa's interesting. The Springboks have a proud heritage, so I'm going to be a Springbok fan. Of course, the first question I got is, what are you, a racist? I'm like, what? It's rugby. Let go. Please, stop. Anyway, but it was the same thing when I started learning Afrikaans, and of course, my response to that was, racist. You do realize that the majority of people speak this as a first language are not white Afrikaners, right? You do realize that, huh? Anyway, so yeah, you got to explain yourself. But so there was no side here, and so I became a Springbok fan back in the day. But USA Rugby is I've always made the argument for the last 20 years that if rugby union wants to explode, now that's an odd description, a verb, adjective, because rugby union is growing. It's the fastest growing team sport around the world before Rona hit. I don't know the current status. Nobody's telling us those things these days. But this has been a sport that's been growing by leaps and bounds. Germany is becoming a more seasoned national team. Yep. And, it goes on and on around the world. Hong Kong, the list is endless. And so, but I've said to really make the impact, and I'm not being egocentric here or being, pro-American, but the reality is this: the largest media market in the world, the most lucrative dollar market to make money off of sports is the United States. And if rugby union wants to make it, it's got to have a splash in the United States. It's got to make it. Major League Rugby, we can talk about that in a little bit if you want to talk about that. I'm happy to talk about that. That's finally here. We have Professional League now. It's fifth year. Not enough seats in the bleachers, not enough bums in the seats. But again, Rona is affecting that. But don't have television money. And that's made an impact. So I think that my argument is when Super Rugby was expanding all over the place, it was going to Japan and it went to Argentina. I said, that's lovely and it's interesting, but you're spreading yourself too thin. The time zones are too challenging. If you're going to do that, you might as well go to San Diego or at least Hawaii and get in an American team and draw in that revenue. But my point is that if rugby union wants to make a big splash, as you indicated, TV revenue is where it's at. And that money is sitting squarely in the United States. There's a lot of cash here. It's just got to be drawn in.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's why the rest of the world refers to the US rugby as the sleeping giant. And it's it's not just about the cash; it's about the talent that you have access to. And I know at the moment, if you had to probably analyze it, you'd probably find that the players that play rugby are those who didn't make it at maybe at American football or at basketball, and rugby is maybe their third or fourth choice. It's still a massive talent pool. Imagine if you could just tap in and get some of those unbelievable athletes who make it in the big money sports to come and play rugby union. And if rugby union by then was a money sport, it would really create a proper giant in the global game of rugby. I mean, the skill sets, the talent would be enormous. You've got the speed, the size. We see that in other sports. If you could somehow get some of those players playing in a strong league with a couple of foreigners, the game would explode, and it would explode very, very quickly.
Well, I think we're starting to see that. I had kind of last year a special relationship with the Rugby ATL, the Atlanta side, which was virtually half South African. So I had kind of a special relation with them. I had a good deal with the team. They gave me exclusive interview coverage. I interviewed every player during the season at least once, and some more than once. Some fantastic players. Kurt Coleman playing for Atlanta, of course, former Western Province guy. And then we also had Johan Mumpson, who's a heck of a lock. He's playing quite well. He was the forward of the year for Major League Rugby last year. But you see, even guys who've been around for a while and have names, they're known, like Bjorn Basson and Joe Peterson playing for San Diego. Tende Mtawira came over here briefly for DC. It's interesting. And, initially a lot of people look at this, well, Major League Rugby's bringing a bunch of famous names, maybe guys past it, and maybe close to being past it. But if you look at it, a lot of these guys are still in their prime. And now the young South African talent that's coming here to play in Major League Rugby is absolutely astounding. There are some really exciting South Africans, and not just South Africans, some Fijians, Samoans, even Kiwis who've come over to play in this league. To me, that's a very healthy sign that there's a chance that Major League Rugby is going to survive and it's going to excel. Because if players are coming from around the world to the U.S., it's not simply to go to Disney World. There must be another reason they're coming here.
Yeah, very much so. And I think I can only really speak on behalf of some of the South Africans, or in a way to try and give some insight to the South African thought process. So we obviously have a huge amount of talent here. There's a lot of players. There's a lot of guys who look at it and think, well, we borderline, we might be a good provincial player in this country, but maybe there's opportunity to become a test player in another country. So, we've seen a lot of players playing for Scotland at the moment. We've seen a couple playing for France over the last few years. We're now seeing a couple playing in that US team. And I think what else adds impetus to that whole story is the fact that the US is spending on coaching. Gary Gold is a great friend of mine. He was also a big friend of HO, by the way. And Gary Gold is the US coach. He's done some really good work with the US team in challenging circumstances, and hopefully he will coach them to the Rugby World Cup in 2023, and hopefully they'll do a little bit better, because I think there's nothing that quite breeds success like success itself. And if you have a national team that is gaining public support, winning a few games, competing well against the likes of the Springboks and the All Blacks and England and Ireland and France and the top sides, and you don't have to be winning to be achieving, because everything is relevant, but you've got to be competitive. And if the Eagles can come out and be competitive, and they can start gathering a little bit of public support and a little bit of sentiment and a little bit of good feeling, and maybe pick up one or two wins and a couple of good results against the big sides, I think all of a sudden you'll have that story where success starts breeding success, and you have this upward spiral. And then the league from that will be enhanced. You'll get more top players who want to come play there. And I don't know, it's a chicken egg scenario, whether you can get the money and then bring the players in, or if you need to have success to bring the money in. But ultimately, if success is breeding success, you will get the right end result, and you'll have a great league. You'll have those top players wanting to come play the game of rugby union, and ultimately you will perpetuate this whole success story.
Well, let me bring a comment in from the chat very quickly. Grant Rothman says, Joel Stransky, you made me laugh and cry being 6 years old, 95. Respect. Okay, well, thank you for reminding us how young you are, Grant. We appreciate that. That's all right. Your youth and experience are accepted on the program. Thanks, Grant. But also thanks for the kind compliment to Joel. Speaking of USA Rugby and the Eagles, I was thrilled beyond belief to hear that Gary Gold had been selected as the coach. And, and we went on a tear. Now, to be fair, John Mitchell played a role in helping build that squad when Gary came in, but they went on a tear. They were 9-0 in a test season. They beat Scotland in Houston. Yeah. It was quite an exciting season. And then some people look and say the wheels came off. I disagree. You were in Japan. I don't know how closely you had a chance, because you're busy broadcasting, to look at the Eagles, but I went to all the Springboks games, of course. That's first priority. Then come the Eagles, but all 4 Springboks games. And then, and of course, you and I saw each other in Kobe after the game there against Canada, I think it was. But I went to 3 of the Eagles games. And as far as being competitive, I want to tell you what, Joel. I was sitting with the team family members, because I knew Hanko Gemeshuis. I know his mom, and so I moved from my seat to there, and I was sitting with them, and we were surrounded by French fans, and they were wetting their nappies up to about the 63rd minute of that game. We played France, terrified that they were going to lose to the Eagles. The Eagles were competitive in that game. I think they just ran out of steam at the end. And then the other game is the Tonga game. We had it in hand in the first half, and 2 missed assignments on line breaks killed us with 2, almost 90-meter tries.
Soft tries.
Yeah, very soft tries. And we lost to Tonga. But were it not for that, the USA could have come out of Japan 2 wins and 2 losses in the pool stage, which would have been unbelievable.
Yeah, and I think that's the result of having a team that is a little inexperienced at managing the last 20 minutes of a big game, and maybe to the other point, maybe not having the depth to come on off the bench and really close a game out. Like the bigger teams, the Springboks call their bench the bomb squad.
Yep.
They bring bench sensational and can close out a game against any team in the world. And I think the US probably lack a little bit of depth there, and maybe in those games in particular, we're a little naive in the last 20 minutes. I think it's Tonga discipline let them down as well, if I remember correctly. There were a couple of disciplinary issues and just maybe a couple of pivotal penalties they gave away at the wrong times. But to your point, there is so much potential there. There is so much good that should have and could have come out of that hopefully will manifest its future. That you did right. This is a team that can go on and grow. That will learn to win those big games at some point. I always have this. I always believe that winning and losing, for that matter, is a habit. And once you learn the habits and you learn what it takes to develop that habit, that's a habit that stays. which is why teams go through form. You get on a losing streak and that becomes a habit. And I think this is a USA team that at some point will pick up that win and they'll go, this is what we did to pick up the win. We know how to do it. Now we'll do it again. And those games that they maybe should have and could have won will be games they did win and should have and deserved to win.
Absolutely, I agree, and that's the key. The depth, I think, was the problem. Also, it's always a question of fitness. But for a World Cup, a team should be fit. But so I don't think that's an excuse there. But you see it, teams that are there, and then they just kind of lose it late in the game because they're not necessarily fit. But it's a nice thing to have in your pocket if you're Rossi and you've got a bomb squad where you make replacements, and the team not only is as good as it was with the guy going off, but sometimes even better with the fresh legs coming in,
who are
as talented or more talented than the guys who went off. I saw that this past weekend with Rugby Atlanta. Alex Maughan got a brace, at hooker. He got 2 tries, and then Marco Janssen van Rensburg came in, and that was no knockoff. That was a step up. They played even better with him there, so it's nice to have that ability. We don't quite have that depth here, but to your point, Joel, I would say that for USA Rugby, we are now entering that stage where kids are growing up with rugby, where they get that ball when they're 6 or 7 years old, and it's a rugby ball, not a basketball, not a football. That's begun to happen. And when that transition goes with a generation of kids who grow up with the sport, the USA will be unstoppable. We will be scary on the pitch. I guarantee it. There's no doubt about it. We saw it in other sports when the USA wasn't involved. We actually had a decent national men's soccer team for a while. They're abysmal now, but that was a consequence of nobody played soccer in the 60s or 70s. And they tried professional soccer. Pele came up here. Anyway, it didn't catch on to the early 80s. From the early 80s to the turn of the century, and in those 20 years, 2 generations of kids grew up with the sport, and suddenly we had world-class strikers, and we could play it. The same thing is underway right now with rugby. Jack Iscaro grew up playing it in D.C. He plays for Old Glory D.C., DeMonte Williams. The list is endless. It's good news for USA Rugby. We're not going to have to rely on dragging people like Perry Baker from the NFL over to play sevens and be a star. We'll be able to bring them up in the sport itself, and the sky's the limit when we get to that stage.
So, and I think the other important thing is that the development of those players comes at the right age. You mentioned how those 2 soccer generations got given balls as kids. The rugby players are getting given balls at the moment. And I always compare the New Zealand coaching infrastructure to the South African coaching infrastructure, and for that matter, probably similar to the USA. Those kids in New Zealand, boys and girls for that matter, they grow up with the rugby ball in their hands. But when they're old enough, they go to a club and they are coached by people who know the game, who understand how to coach, who are taught to coach the skill sets that are required as a young kid to start playing the game. And those basics are instilled in the kids at a very, very young age. And with the basic skill set comes the basic mentality as well. Rugby has an incredible, it has an incredible sort of dynamic tribal thought process of its own. It's about integrity and honesty and about passion and working hard for the guy next to you. It's and honesty. It's a skill set you can teach kids that actually you would carry through your family life, your work life itself. New Zealand teach those basic skill sets. And I think in South Africa, why we've come unstuck at times in the last few years, because a lot of our kids grew up with a soccer ball, to your point, and maybe not with a rugby ball. When they got to that age where they should have been taught the basics, they were being taught maybe the biggest guy carries the ball and not how to pass the ball. It's tiny little things. And I think as a result, New Zealand, who have probably the least number of rugby players out of the big playing rugby nations, still continue to dominate. And it's because the coaching, because the kids grew up with a rugby ball at a young age, and because they were coached correctly at a young age. So if those kids in the US are now growing up with a rugby ball in their hands, that's great news. Now you want to see them, parents and teachers being taught how to coach those kids, the basic skill set, the right skill set at the right young age that prepare them for rugby at an older age.
Absolutely. When I was at the World Cup in 2011, in between games, I was staying in Rotorua there where the hot springs are and the geysers, you guys say geysers, we say geysers, but the geysers were there and they're shooting up out of the ground. And I stayed in I think a Mercure or something like that, one of the French chain hotels there. And I walk out and it's the middle of the World Cup and in a public park across the street, what's going on? 6 and 8 year olds playing rugby in the middle of the week after school. That's what they're doing. And I always tell people, I said, if you want to be successful, you have to take the approach Kiwis take. All maternity wards have mandatory mini replica rugby balls, which they hand to newborns the moment they're delivered. So once you get to that stage,
and those are New Zealand rugby balls.
Exactly.
They're not any other country's rugby balls.
They're Canterbury products.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's yeah. I think that it's interesting. It's World Rugby. Look, I'm on record as having some issues with World Rugby, so I don't want to get into a tiff about that. But I would have to compliment them on some things that have been done lately. I have to say that Nigel Owen's little skits he's doing and the little videos analysis he's been doing that have been published by World Rugby are brilliant and really are opening up the game to people that don't understand the game. He explains it so well. Nigel's brilliant. He's amazing. And things like that, I think, are fantastic. That's away from the game, but it is the game, and it draws people in. I think it's a nice approach, and I'm really glad to see that World Rugby has brought Nigel on. I don't need to see his cattle anymore. I used to be a farmer, but anyway, it's a nice touch to the videos.
It's a great touch. And I think World Rugby, to your point, they've had their issues. I think they've made some decisions in the last few years which have been a little debatable or a little questionable, but I think the way they're going about things at the moment is really good. And there's a bit of criticism around, where that's still, the old, you call the geezers and the gazers. There's still a question around whether it's the old geezers running the game or not. But the reality is you need experienced people running a business. Yeah. You need old hands who understand the history and the culture to be involved. You might need younger people, managing the social media and the operational issues. But I think in the large part, World Rugby are getting a lot right at the moment. And I think the one thing they've done beautifully, as you quite rightly point out, is the explanation of critical decisions that have been made, whether in test matches or URC matches or Champions League games. They've just picked on some of those and they've explained them nicely. Because let's be quite frank, our game, as beautiful as it can be unbelievably frustrating at times because the laws are so complex. Oh. They are so open to interpretation. They are so difficult to understand at times. And at times, to be quite frank, they make no sense at all. To have some of those laws explained, and the way Nigel does it has been fantastic.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And listen, the thing about what I love about rugby is that the officials are as fit or fitter than players on the pitch. They have to be. I mean, they run more than anybody else in the game. I mean,
some of them, not all of them.
Okay, fair enough. Some, but I mean, honestly, if they're in the game, then they're running more because I mean, if you're on the wing, you can hang on the other side of the field waiting for the play to develop and coming for phases without officials running out. But I mean, there's some really great names. One of the nice things with Major League Rugby is that they hired Jonathan Kaplan to help improve the level of officiating, and that was an absolutely brilliant. I interviewed him last summer. Our summer for us, winter for you. But absolutely brilliant conversation with Jonathan Kaplan about Major League Rugby and the officiating. And in the 5 years that the league has been in play, I've seen a demonstrable improvement, especially from season 3 to 4. And this year it looks even better. Scott Green, we've got Damian Schneider out there from Argentina, some really talented officials out there. But I mean, the officials are part of the game. Whether people like it or not, they're part of the game, and hopefully they're a complement to the game. But there are compliments to the game when you remember names like Wayne Barnes and Nigel Owens, Jaco Piper, Craig Joubert. I mean, Craig Joubert, one of my all-time favorites. I saw him at the Sevens, and I had a conversation with him. And unfortunately, I mentioned the Australia-Scotland call, but no, just kidding.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. You remember officials and also the ones who are, the players remember them too. You as a player. I mean, what was it like with officials on the field? These days, you see that because of the microphones and stuff where players like, okay, listen, Bismarck, come here, Bismarck, and officials have a little conversation, and it's a bit entertaining to the game and also keeps the game flowing. Any thoughts on officiating, and did you ever have any interesting encounters as a player with officials?
Well, firstly, so Craig is and names, and there were one or two. He had one or two controversial decisions, and you mentioned the one. The one was obviously in the World Cup final in New Zealand, which you would have been party to, and the French will always look at that and think that that penalty should have gone the other way, and France should have won that World Cup final. And so he had a bit of controversy. But the reality is, every ref who's ever reffed the game has made decisions that are controversial. Some are just bigger in the context of the game at the time, and others are probably flown under the radar because the timing is different, or it's in a game that hasn't had as much exposure. The reality as well is that referees, just like players, are human beings. They make mistakes. They get things wrong from time to time. And World Rugby, behind the scenes, has a way of trying to sanction and rate the referees and make sure the best refs get the big games, the most important games, so that we get the right results. The other thing I love about what World Rugby has done is they've brought in the TMO in a way where we try and get the decisions right. Does it always work? Absolutely not. Does it take time every now and then, and too much time? For sure. But I think most of the time we're reaching a point now where the decisions that are being made are the right decisions. We're not having games and outcomes of games influenced by a bad decision. We might have a game that is too long, and I think back on the British and Irish Lions series in this country last year, we had one test match that took 133 minutes, I think it was, to play an 80-minute game. I mean, that is absolutely ridiculous. There was reason for that, though. The coaches put the fear of God into the TMO and into the referee, and it created a real long, slow process. But for the major part, I think we're at a point in the game where you've got the likes of Nigel Owen doing little video clips explaining the game. You have a structure in place for the TMO's involvement to make sure the decisions that are made are the right decisions, that tries are awarded when they're scored, and where tries are not scored, they're not awarded, where there's foul play issues are being reported and sanctioned. It just, for me, it's it works. Is the game perfect at the moment? Absolutely not. I'm 100% sure the game's not perfect. We still have, I think, a game which is quite predictable at the moment, and we maybe need to look at the laws of it. But are we doing our best to supply a product that is worth watching, that is wonderful still? I think we are, and I think to the referees, we'd say right now, whoever's heading up the referees from a World Rugby perspective, they are doing a fine job.
100% agree with you, but for me, it's different than an official on the basketball court, different than an official in ice hockey. Although they work pretty hard too, they have to skate back and forth, but there's more of them on the ice. But World Rugby, Rugby Union, 15 players aside, and an official out there plus the two side judges. It's a tough thing. The TMO is a nice addition, and we finally have that Major League Rugby this year. It was long overdue. I really appreciate that they've got that in there. But folks, you're listening to Chris Wyatt Africa. This is a Rugby Ascendant segment, and my special feature guest today is none other than Springbok legend, successful businessman, and World Rugby commentator extraordinaire, Joel Stransky, a voice that you recognize instantly if you were watching a rugby broadcast. And I think that's probably the best statement to talk about your broadcasting. The moment, if I turn it on, like if I miss who's the broadcasters and I just hear the voice, there's Joel. I know it's Joel. There's a certain other famous South African who's got a very deep baritone voice. Hugh, I think his name is. There's also a very recognizable voice.
Yeah, Hugh Bladen. They call it. They tell me I've got that dull, boring, the dulcet tones. They call it. But Hugh Bladen is the most wonderful man, and just maybe touching on him for a second. He was such a great mentor when I went into broadcasting. On my first few games, I worked with him, and he was incredible, and became a dear friend as well. And he too, he had a bad stroke a couple months ago, and he has recovered, and he's doing pretty well. But our thoughts are with him still. But rugby has this unbelievable knack to bring people together, and the characters of the game, keep the game alive, and they make it exciting for us. And Blades is one of those. When he commentates, he has that trademark unbelievable statement, and it's something we listen for, and we love it when he whips it out.
Well, I have to be honest, the first time I listened to a rugby broadcast, that's who I heard. And to me, that's just always the voice of commentating on rugby. It's just stuck with me. You played. It's just amazing. I didn't know his last name for a while there because I was hearing it. I wasn't seeing it, and then I finally got to watch broadcast. Yeah. It's just epic. Absolutely fantastic stuff. Well, there's a few comments here in the chat, Joel, just very quickly. Patrick says, when Joel slapped that drop kick, I lost my marbles.
I think a lot of us lost our marbles that day, for either temporarily or for some time. It was a very special day for us in our country, and it was one of those days. I think if you look back on history, there were certain things that happened that where you were. It was like, if I think back on important days in my life, aside from my personal things, those iconic moments in the world where you sort of think back and where I was on that day, the night Princess Di died, when the Twin Towers went down, For us South Africans, it was Rugby World Cup 1995. It was such a big moment for us. Not so much, well, on the field as well, but certainly off the field with Nelson Mandela and with us as a nation, at a tipping point. The leadership that he showed in and around Rugby World Cup just ensured a peaceful transition into democracy. It was a very, very special time for us.
Absolutely. I no doubt about it. I agree with you. There's certain points in life where you'll never forget where you were, what you're doing. For me, some of those moments in life are the moment that my mother came out of the house and told me that Elvis Presley had died, because I knew Elvis as a child. I used to wander around Graceland, and he was a really good guy. I mean, whatever happened in his life the last few years with his health and such, but he was amazing. So I'll never forget that. When the Challenger blew up, I know exactly. I was cleaning my rifle in the day room in Germany. Just came back from the range. I'll never forget that. I was watching it happen live. Sure. It was heartbreaking. And of course, 9/11, things like that. Yeah, I'm with you. It's those moments stay with you forever that aren't your personal moments, but the poignant moments in the timeline of life. Really interesting stuff. Now, I've got to ask a question here from the audience, Joel, because Henk Klopper's here, and Henk is in my connection extraordinaire. He's been so helpful in getting me connected to former Springboks like yourself, Springbok number 592, if I'm not mistaken, that's your number. But getting me connected to former Springboks and other players. He helped me get Victor Matfield and others on. So Henk's question is, please ask Joel which Rugby World Cup winning Springboks team was the best. Ooh, well, there's three choices: 95, 2007, and 2019. All right, Joel, you're on the spot. Which of those three Springbok Rugby World Cup winning teams was the best?
I mean, I'm surprised you could even ask that question. You should know that 95 was the best team.
I didn't ask the question. My audience did.
No, so I think the game of rugby union is very difficult to compare across different age categories or different eras, because the game changes and there's interpretations in the law, and there's many little innuendos that make it tough. Plus, there's timing, So I think if you look back on our rugby playing nation at the actual physical attributes of the team, 95, we were a great side. We were a great side, but we played a brand of rugby that was probably more defensive. Mm-hmm. We kicked a lot. We didn't really run the ball all that much. If you look back to 2007, it was a team that was unbelievably mature. That Jake White took from being an immature team to being a very mature, great team, loaded with talent, great players across the board. And then you look at 2019 again, a team that mirrored that, both those sides. And so in 95, if you think back 2 or 3 years before the Rugby World Cup, it was a team that really didn't achieve much. They'd lost a couple of home games. They'd just come into Rugby World Cup and just come back into international rugby. Struggled a little bit, got to the World Cup and surprised everyone and won it. 2007, 2 years before, a team that struggled. Jake White came in, picked players, built them up. And all of a sudden, at the Rugby World Cup, they came through, quite comfortably. 2019, Rassie Erasmus, 2 years before, took a team that hadn't won a game. I think they'd lost 9 on the trot, or certainly had struggled. And all of a sudden, he built this great team that won the World Cup. So all three teams, in their own way, have a very similar trajectory towards the Rugby World Cup. So you would think they'd be quite similar. In my view, when I look back on those sides and I think of the talent that was in those teams, it's probably for me not so much about the overall talent and the players that did it, but maybe around special players, special moments. And in 95 we had Madiba, Nelson Mandela, as our sort of unofficial captain, who was the key in the storyline. 2007, it was very different. It was a team that went and won away from home in difficult circumstances, but probably, you think back, they played who they had in front of them, but they never really had to play any other big sides in the World Cup, just the way it worked out. They had to beat England twice. For me, 2019 was dominated by Siya Kolisi. And, you'd have to go some distance to find a man as great as Siya Kolisi. He is one of the inspirational characters, right up there with Madiba, coming from a real, poverty-stricken background. When he was growing up, he didn't know whether to have his one meal a day before school, so he could concentrate at school, or before rugby training, so he could train hard for rugby. And to have come through and achieved what he has achieved, to be our captain of the World Cup winning team, so the All Blacks come back and having to beat the home side Japan, to beat Wales, and to then have to beat England, who everyone thought would win it easily. That is just a sensational World Cup achievement, and to be the leader of that team is incredibly special. So which team is best? I think they're probably all are quite similar, but for me, when I look back, it is Sia, the human being, that stands out.
Oh, that's an excellent analysis. Thanks for that. For me, that World Cup, as I said, I was at all 4 pool stage games for the Springboks, and I had a seat that was at the end of the tri-zone on the north side of the stadium in Yokohama for the AllBlacks game. And it was, I thought it was going to be a terrible spot. But, rugby has a funny way of sometimes working in your advantage. I just have good luck. Most of the game was played right in front of me, including when Cheslin Colby had that breakaway and nearly scored that try. I think he ran like 50 meters, 60 meters. That for me, that World Cup, one of the faces of it was Cheslin Colby. He was fantastic, really great player. Exciting to see him break out in that World Cup. But, the depth, as you talked about, we talked earlier about the bomb squad, the Springboks just wore everybody down, except the All Blacks in the first game. They didn't wear them down. It was a little bit different, but they really wore people down. That bomb squad was something else. When Rossi first took over, the first test match they played was in D.C. at our Third World Stadium, RFK. It's falling apart. I was at that game, rather disappointing crowd of 25,000. It should have been so many more, but I was at that game, and all these debutantes were out there getting time, and I'm like, what are you doing? They're making us. We want to win this game, and I should have thought about it. Rossi had a plan. He was trying to get guys experience on the pitch, and it worked. He wasn't worried about wins. He was worried about building a team 2 years from now, and that was, I think, a very strategic vision, and it paid off, and we see it once again. But it is interesting you mentioned, Joel. I think most people don't recognize that each Springbok William Webb Ellis Trophy winning team has gone from the nadir, a very low point, 2 years prior, and then become the world champions. That's absolutely amazing. I think that's a tribute to Springbok and South African rugby.
Well, I think it's a tribute to the tenacity of the South African mindset. I would guess. We've always had a huge amount of talent in this country. We just churn talent. If you see the schoolboys that are coming through the system. Earlier today, we have a competition called the Varsity Cup. I was watching a game between a university that should never, ever be competitive, really. Small university from the Western Cape playing against one of the big universities from Potchefstroom, just outside Joburg. It was a sensational half that I watched, a couple of unbelievable tries. The talent we turn out in this country is just sensational. But what we have here in maybe even in sub-Saharan Africa, because it's not only us. If you think of Zimbabwe, and we lovingly call them the Zimbos, and their mindset and their ability to survive and thrive, and the tenacity that they show, the determination they show. I think it's something here in the southern. It must be in the water here in Southern Africa. It's just something that gives you that ability to step up when the chips are down and deliver something special, and the rugby players have shown that. I think there's nothing more dangerous than a wounded Springbok or a wounded South African sports person in any sport, and the Springboks have shown that. They in 1995 we were the rank underdogs. The only time anyone ever. 2007, Jake Watt came in and no one gave us any chance. In 2019. To your point, Rossi had a plan. Rossi came in and he just, in that team, you would know the Afrikaans word, a spirit, a gees, that was just, it just defined the team, who they were, how they went about things, the tenacity, the determination, the grit they showed. And that was a team that, even though they lost that game against the All Blacks, and they lost that game, by the way, in about 6 minutes. The All Blacks scored those 2 tries in 6 or 7 minutes, and it just changed the whole game. That World Cup campaign was a really good World Cup campaign. Aside from those 6 minutes, it was a team that were under pressure after losing that did what was required when it wasn't. They kept really the epitome of this attitude.
Folks, just a reminder there, we're having some difficulty because Joel's connection is not the best on Wi-Fi. He's out on a farm, and so he's back now. But, Joel, before we get back to the World Cup, I want to talk specifically about the 2019 World Cup. We were both there and we both experienced it, and I think it was amazing. But before we get to that, I just want to talk about, you talk about it's difficult. It isn't, I don't think it's really fair to compare rugby in different eras to which is the greatest team. I think you have to look at eras and say which is the greatest team, as you said. I mean, you go back to the time we were talking about HO earlier. He was playing games in which the score was 16-7 and it was 8-8 and 10-7 and 6-3. Very different game than what opened up in the professional era. And you see a lot of stuff where people are running around. Now, I love offense. Sorry, I played on the wing. I love to see guys score, so I like the speed. Defensive struggles are nice, but I like to see points racked up in games too. And so when I was at the Tri-Nations game in 2013 in Joburg, when they replicated the flyover from 95, I was at that game. That was one of the most exciting games I went to. Habana had 2 tries before he pulled a hamstring and had to go out in the game. And the Springboks, for the first time in ages, opened up the game. And they were head-to-head, and then the All Blacks pulled ahead late in the game. They won it, but it was disappointing to see the All Blacks win. But that was exciting. Rossi's team with Faf de Klerk took a lot of criticism from Springboks fans for this boring box kick over the top, turning there's a lot of criticism for that. But it worked in the World Cup, and now the British and Irish Lions series, that's a whole different story. It worked there too, but let me tell you, I was able to catch up on a lot of my sleep watching those contests last year in South Africa.
You and me both. So the first thing I would say, back in the eras, and you touched on HO and the tighter games that they were in the past. I think firstly, when you look back that far, the teams came together maybe on a Wednesday before a test match. They had very little time to prepare. They didn't have TV to study the opposition. They just went out and played. Probably more errors, tougher, less time to prepare and less time to think about great attacking structures, and any structure for that matter. If you think of the game now, the one thing I would say is that the laws of the game have encouraged a conservative approach. The laws of the game have encouraged teams, to try and milk penalties, to kick for the corners, to maul and get another penalty, and get a penalty try or kick the 3 points. And Rossi just exploited the laws of the game. In 2019 at the Rugby World Cup, you're 100% right. He played the most dire game plan that you can ever imagine. If you thought you were, catching up on sleep, for the rest of us who wanted to see the skills and the talent of those great players coming to the fore, we too were critical. We too were saying, for heaven's sake, stop kicking the damn ball away and keep it in hand a little bit. We've got so much, pace and strength and so much skill out wide. Let those guys have a go. Play the game the way it was meant to be played. But at the end of the day, coaches and teams are defined by success, and it was a plan that worked. It was a plan that at the end, the Springboks are the 2019 Rugby World Champions, and so it's a plan that nearly didn't work because Wales nearly game plan in that semi-final, and then if you think back to the final itself, we did actually move the ball around a bit, but it was a game plan that worked, and it's not pretty, but it's damn effective and it's very difficult to beat. And in many ways, it plays the laws and the way we played were great for us as South Africans. We are big and powerful. We are strong. We do have a great physical presence. It's a game that we quite naturally and for a game that
We still got you, Joel?
I'm still there.
Okay.
You have frozen a little bit. Yep. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. It's just the connection. Yeah, no, it's so. Speaking of taking advantage of the laws, last year in the World Cup qualifier, which unfortunately Gary Gold's squad didn't secure, they wound up losing to Uruguay. By the way, an impressive up and coming rugby nation has been for a number of years. Uruguay. I warned people in Japan that they were for real, and they are. So they've now got the Americas number one. First time anyone other than Canada or the U.S. got it, and they earned it. Much to my disappointment and chagrin, as I did live commentary of those games. But taking advantage of rules, the USA went up to the Maritime Provinces to play Canada for the first round in the two test match to see who got the aggregate on points. And the USA gets across, the ball's held up, and instead of a 5-meter scrum, all of a sudden the Canadians are kicking the ball from the try line and they get 46 meters out. And I'm like, what's going on here? I didn't hear about this. And then the other was this, okay, yeah, that's a 50-22. So I'm telling my audience, okay, so it'll be Canada's ball. What? The U.S. is on a line out. What's going on here? Okay, let me say. Okay, so I saw that. Now, I am not a fan of the held up and going back, and I'll explain why. Because oftentimes, even with a TMO, it's impossible for an official to determine if a player genuinely got the ball down correctly with pressure because there's bodies everywhere, and you may have scored a try and you can't see it. I think it's unfair to punish an attacking team for that. Now, I get why World Rugby did it. They're trying to open the game up. They think repeated, scrums and phases right there gets boring. I get it, but I think that's a pretty harsh thing to do. Now, the 50-22 rule, at first I was just shaking my head going, what's going on here? But I like this now. It really opens up and forces the team to play defense. What are your thoughts on the 50-22 and the other law that changed it for the held up in the try zone? Any thoughts on that?
So firstly, I like the concept of the 50-22 because it's not really designed to say if you kick a good kick, you get the line out. That is just a consequence of the design. It's designed to say if you are open to conceding in that area, conceding lineouts, you're open to conceding tries from mauls, you're putting yourself at risk. So what you have to do is you have to defend it, which means you got to have players back defending a good kick. What it means is if you've got those guys back defending a good kick, it means there's less players in the defensive line, which means from an attacking perspective, the other team will try and find a bit of space. It encourages you to play a more attacking brand of rugby, and actually it encourages you to kick less and play more, which sounds completely like a moron talking about the game, but it is one of those anomalies of the game. And if the defensive team stand up flat, you're going to kick it and you're going to win those 50-20-22s and you're going to maul and maybe score some more tries. So it for me, the thought process there is quite smart, and I think it is actually working quite well. I'm quite neutral about the goal line dropout, and I like the idea that if you kick it in there and you kick one or two little attacking kicks and the opposition ground it, they got to kick it out from there, not from 22 meters out. I like that thought process. When you held up over the line, there is a part of me that says it is so tough to defend your goal line when the other team are on the attack and they have the advantage of knowing when they're going to pick up and when they're going to drive, and you've got defenders spread and they can all of a sudden have two men and then a third man driving you over the line. If you do hold them up, it is a sensational effort and maybe you should be rewarded. Maybe the reward is that you don't have to sit on your goal line and defend another scrum or another pick and go and be camped down there until someone makes a mistake. Maybe it is saying, let's reward you for that great defensive effort and let you kick the ball downfield and give you a bit of respite. I understand your point where you say, if you're on attack and all of a sudden you try and desperately to score and get over the line and you are held up, you shouldn't be punished and have to start from, Frans Steyn's kicking the dropout. You shouldn't have to start from 60 meters back again. It's a fair point, but there's a part of me that says if you go around the corner and you attack that zone all the time and eventually you held up, maybe the defensive team should be rewarded. Maybe they've done something good to deserve a little respite.
Spot on. I agree with your assessment 100%. And to be clear, my position on that rule is that I think it's great to reward a defensive team. I mean, some teams are really put a lot of effort in, a dozen phases, 20 phases. They hold up, they manage it, and they hold the player up. That's brilliant defensive work. You should be rewarded for that. I don't have a problem with that. The problem is that, as I said, there are times there's so many bodies in here you can't see clearly. The guy may have scored, and because the TMO can't see it because the official couldn't see it, he went to TMO. Then you're penalized when you actually scored a try, and then that's the harsh part of it for me. So I guess it's I think in the end I might come around to your view. By the way, Nate Osborne, the Kiwi who coached New Orleans last year, he also agrees that he likes that. Not that you're neutral, but he likes that rule. I might find myself shifting more to that position, liking it over time. It's just when I first saw it, the first application of instantiation of was USA scored a goal and they didn't get it because the official didn't see it, so they got. So I was not happy. That's
got a better law that I want changed. So here's one for you to think about.
Okay, go ahead.
So here's the thing. So if you didn't get the goal line dropout in that situation, you get the opposition or the team that are on attack get an attack scrum. So now they are dominating and they are physically stronger and they're trying to get over the line and them up, and you're under pressure already. And now all of a sudden, their reward is a scrum. If you battle in that scrum, and here's really where it comes into play. The scrum goes down. You get your prop or whoever's collapsed the scrum, more than likely one of your props. He gets sent to the sin bin.
Ooh.
So now you under pressure on the scrum. You're already taking, a bashing. And what happens? The law says, hell, you're the weaker team. Let's make you weaker by sending one of your best players off. So you send your best, I don't know, loose head or tight head off. He gets sent off. So what do you got to do? You got to substitute one of your flanks or a winger or someone for your second best prop. And he comes on. And now all of a sudden, you're under pressure already. And the law says, hold on. Not only were you getting hammered already, so we gave the opposition a scrum to hammer you more, off one of your players. So now you've only got 7 against 8. Now the laws are going to say, let's hammer you even more. And then when you under pressure, they give a penalty try against you. For me, there's some anomalies more in that situation than in any other situation. Anyway, we digress.
I agree with you. No, we don't digress. It's a fantastic conversation. I agree with you. That's somewhat unfair to say the least. There's some more comments here from the chat. Somebody said Nas is boss. Hank Klopper. Yeah, Hank, just an update there, Hank. I have written to Nas. I've not heard back from him. Hint, Joel. I haven't heard back from him about coming.
So let me I'll give you an update on Nas. So Nas is probably a little bit slow right now because Nas is running up and down between South Africa and India. He is director of rugby for the Indian Rugby Union, and he's doing some coaching there, and he's I would guess he's a little slow on email probably because particularly with COVID, he's in and out and he's traveling a fair bit. So if I see him, I'll mention it to him.
All right.
But hats off to Nas at his age. He's working his butt off still, and he's running around, still involved in the great game.
Absolutely. And I had no idea he was working with India. That's to be a fascinating angle to talk about that if I get him on the channel, just to talk about what's going on in India, because it's always great to talk about how the game is growing and where it's going. All right, let's shift quickly to Japan 2019 when World Rugby, I'm a dinosaur. I prefer IRB, the International Rugby Board. I prefer that designation. This World Rugby is anyway, whatever. That's what it is now. But when World Rugby took a flyer on Japan several years back and awarded them the World Cup, some people are scratching their head. Now, I wasn't, because I'm a historian and I'm a fan of the game. I'm like, you got to take a look at Japan. It's a serious rugby nation, and this is a brilliant opportunity to do something. Take it to Asia and do something. If you're going to take it to Asia, that's the place to go. My take, and then I'll get yours. You were there as a broadcaster and a commentator, and so you attended the games in the booth and had interaction with officials, with players, with host nation folks, everybody. I went as a fan, but also was there as a journalist writing stories for it. I missed my calling. I should have started my YouTube channel on rugby back then. I'd have had 500,000 subscribers from the World Cup, but I didn't do that. That was a mistake. But
yeah, exactly.
It was a huge mistake, and then in retrospect, I regret not doing that. But anyway, so I was there in that capacity, and it was without a doubt. I've been to the World Cup in New Zealand 2011, Paris for the women in 2014, England 2015, Ireland 2017 for the women, San Francisco for the Sevens in 2018, and Japan in 2019. That's 6 World Cups in 8 years. And without a doubt, this was an absolutely brilliant executed plan and run World Cup. The Japanese were incredible. The only frustration I had with the whole thing was Hagibis, which was frustrating at the end, and it was terrible for the Japanese. But that aside, that's just nature. You can't overcome that. The only frustration I had is that I've never been to Japan, and I've always been told that the Japanese speak English. No, they don't. I'd say about less than 10% of Japanese speak any degree of proficiency in English. In fact, in Yokohama, I was confused trying to find a train. You know how some of those tracks, and you're trying to read the signs, and the trains are coming. You don't want to miss your train. And I ran into a young man. They always want to help. They're wonderful people. And he came over to help me in Japanese, and he didn't speak English. Yep. So I said, parlez-vous français? He's like, oh, bien sûr, français, c'est pas de problème. And I'm like, okay, so we communicated Japanese and American in French, and that's how I got on my train. But it was an absolutely brilliant World Cup. What are your thoughts on Japan in 2019, Joel?
So I loved it. I had almost 8 weeks in Japan, and I was very, very lucky. For the first 4.5 or 5 weeks, I worked for World Rugby and did a whole lot of pool games. I worked for the broadcast with Talon, and it's where I got to know Dan and spent a lot of time with him. What a great guy he is. I'm a huge fan and a big friend, and privileged to regard him as a friend. He's a wonderful man. A lot of time, and then from there I moved into the Springbok or the Super Sport camp, and spent 3 weeks the knockout stages with Super Sport. So those 4.5 weeks, we traveled. We were mainly in the south, a lot of time in Kobe, a lot of time in and around those southern cities, Osaka and Fukuoka. It was wonderful. I took my bicycle with. I rode everywhere. I rode up into the mountains. I went places no South Africans ever been before, no rugby man's ever been. It was incredibly special. Then 3 weeks in Tokyo, just unbelievable. To your point, though, not a lot of English, but the Japanese are, and in my mind, and undoubtedly the most respectful nation the most helpful nation you can meet, the most well-mannered nation you could ever meet. When they left the stadium was spotless. When the English or the South Africans or any other nation left the stadium, there was a mess. The Japanese picked up everything. It was just an environment that is clean and polite and friendly in every single way. It was a World Cup that was incredibly special. They came out and supported every game. I think from a broadcast point of view, the timelines were probably a little tough in some parts of the world, but I think for the whole, it was a sensational decision by World Rugby or RB at the time when they made the decision, whatever the naming convention was. It was a great decision. I would love to see the next radical World Cup host decision be the US. Mm-hmm. And I think that will help propel rugby in the US, help promote the game, help promote the league. It'll be great for the game. It'll be great for the growth of the game globally, and it'll be great for that timeline of the Americas to be able to really exploit the TV rights and broadcast every game and get that support. So I'm hopeful that World Rugby will make another one of those decisions soon, and that we'll hopefully be coming to the US, to your neck of the woods. We'll be drinking beer in your bar, watching rugby together, laughing and smiling, and enjoying the great game in your homes.
Well, Joel, I don't know what World Rugby is going to do. Frankly, the 2023 World Cup decision astounded me. I mean, the lowest of their internal decisions was France. I mean, Ireland and South Africa came in above that as the best choice, and they picked France. So I don't know what they're going to do, but I have a strong suspicion, and my prediction is that they're going to award 2 World Cups to the U.S., the women in 29 and the men in 31, and they're going to use 29 as a dress rehearsal to see how it can go, and then 31 is going to be the big show. That's what I think is going to happen. And I'm hopeful that does happen because, as you said, it's going to be great for rugby. It'll be great for rugby union. It'll be just a fantastic thing to see. That's my prediction. We'll see if it comes true. The U.S. is pulling for both of those.
Well, let's hope so. And I think from our side, and I have a group of friends, and our group of friends has got an Afrikaans name. They're called the cockroaches, which is really, I think, a cockroach. I think a cockroach is a cockroach.
Yeah, it is.
So we're a bunch of cockroaches that just love the game of rugby union, that also travel and go to Rugby World Cups. And I can tell you from our perspective, from our little group, whether I go as a broadcaster or as a spectator, to go to the US and watch rugby in the US would be, after Japan, because Japan was sensational, would be the ultimate trip, the best next trip that one would want to go on. And hopefully you're right, and hopefully it lives up to all expectations, because to go and travel in the US and see your beautiful country, the parts we haven't seen already, and to watch the game of rugby union there and to see it hosted there would be just marvelous, just wonderful.
Now, I don't disagree, and I'd love to see it. But, of course, for me, I mean, I've been everywhere in the U.S., so I get more excited when the World Cup is in New Zealand or South Africa. Of course, I've been everywhere in those places, too. But for me, it's a different thing because I turn a World Cup into an adventure, not just rugby. I mean, it's culture. When I was in New Zealand, I was going to the glowworm caves. I was going to the geysers. I went skiing during that World Cup in 2011. I went downhill alpine skiing on a glacier up on top of a volcano. It was incredible. So that's what I do with the World Cup. I turn into that sort of thing. And you can still do, U.S., anybody can do that. And even I, who've been all over the country, can still do it. But I think the biggest challenge for the U.S. is going to be just our geography. You've got thousands of miles, between destinations, and how they schedule that and how they pull it off. If they focus on one region, it's not going to be as good. So maybe they have 2 or 3 hubs on the East Coast and Northeast and out West, and maybe that's how they do it. But I don't know. But whatever the case is, they got lots of time to figure it out. They just got to win the bid first, and I think that's critical for the game of rugby for that to happen. Now, the Women's World Cup is coming up here this year. We've got a strange year because The Rugby League, a different game, but Rugby League had its World Cup scheduled for England in 2021. That was postponed late in the game, and it's now being played in 2022. The Women's World Cup was in New Zealand. That was postponed. That's now in 2022. And the Sevens World Cup is on schedule. It's in Cape Town. Tickets go on sale shortly. And that is so 3 World Cups back to back to back. It's going to be, if you're a rugby fan, you're going to be exhausted trying to watch all this rugby. The women, of course, I don't know your view on the women's game, but for me, the women's game is quite exciting. There's some really amazing plays. I mean, for me, I was sold on women's rugby when I was in Paris in 2014, and I watched Mowgli Harvey score one of the most amazing tries I've ever seen in rugby. She was an amazing player for Canada, and Canada did very well in that World Cup. But the women, I think, are very exciting. The last qualifying position is up for grabs on Friday. Colombia, a newer player in this, defeated Kazakhstan this weekend, and they'll be playing against Scotland. They'll get that last slot in Pool A. And the Women's World Cup, I think, should be exciting. Any thoughts on the women's game? Because, I tell South Africans that you have a women's team. Like, no, we don't. Yes, you do. You have a women's national side.
No, we do. We do, and unfortunately, our girls have battled. They've not really delivered. But it is, I think, in this country, it's quite a new game. It's not a particularly popular game just yet. But it'll grow. Hopefully it'll grow, and hopefully some of those really talented ladies who are playing netball or playing other sports at the moment will switch over and play rugby. I'm really looking forward to the World Cup this year. I think it's in New Zealand, if I remember correctly.
Yes, it is.
It should be a great World Cup, and I think the big games will be massive games. If you think about the really strong teams, the likes of New Zealand, France. You might find one or two of those UK-based teams coming in there. The Canada, the big games will be sensational, and I'm looking forward to that. What I've loved in the last couple of HSBC Sevens series tournaments has been watching the ladies more so at times than watching the men, because the men's, as much as, and I say this is really, I should be careful what I say, because the South African team, the Blitzbok, are dominated and have won 40 odd in a row now, which is just sensational. But
you don't see me complaining.
To see some of the smaller teams, to see some of the smaller teams doing well, and in particular in the ladies' sport, to have watched the last couple of tournaments, the likes of Poland, winning a couple of games,
Russia,
Ireland doing so well, Russia.
Yep.
Germany in the men's game, for me, that's been incredible to see the growth of the game. And this Ladies Rugby World Cup or this Women's World Cup will be exactly that. It'll be an opportunity to grow the game. It'll have a full TV following here. I know we as SuperSport will be broadcasting every game with full build-ups and obviously analyzing. We'll be considering it on the magazine shows, and I host one of those magazine shows. We'll definitely be chatting about it. So it will be a massive growth spike in world rugby, particularly for the ladies' game. The other thing, and we as South Africans, we are useless when it comes to understanding rugby league. We had a rugby league team for about 3 days, and they disbanded it and got rid of it. And it was a real shame, because it is the form of rugby union, or the form of rugby with no real scrums. They have a scrum, but it's really just it's just a formality more than anything.
Check the block.
They don't have the ball they don't have these cumbersome mauls. They don't, the ruck is not competitive. It's a very quick game. It's if you've got 5 opportunities to use it, and then really most teams kick it away in 6, because else you turn it over anyway. It's for me, it's a game where I loved. When I was coaching rugby union, I watched a lot of rugby league to learn about set plays and about attacking plays and about the ball behind and the ball in front and running lines and angles. It's a game of really detailed running lines and angles. And I think the Rugby World Cup this year, the Rugby League World Cup, will be for many people very spectacular. It'll be, a lot of big hits, a lot of great scores, a lot of tries, a lot of running rugby. A lot of skill involved. It'll be spectacular to watch.
Absolutely. Well, listen, folks, I'm going to take a few questions from the chat here quickly, because we don't want to overstay our welcome here. We're running up against the time here with Joel. He's been very kind with his time. But Joel, a couple questions very quickly here, if I get you to address it from the audience. One was Richard Lemmer wants to know, who was the scariest South African you ever played against?
Do you know what was quite interesting? I asked that question the other evening of Luke. I said to him, in that squad, that won the 2019 Rugby World Cup, who is it that you were most scared of, particularly at training? Because, you know, guys in the games, everyone gets feisty and gets upset. Who are you most scared of at training? And he said, because I thought it would have been Eben Etzebeth. He said, Bongi Umbanambi. He said at training, he is a madman on the field in the matches, and he's a madman on the field in training. Through my career, the guy I was probably most scared of was, they would, you know, people never really ask who you're most scared of. They often ask who was, you know, the greatest opponent you played against. And Zinzan Brook was sensational, you know, in the international. The guy I was probably most scared of at training was probably Martin Johnson. And when I played at the Leicester Tigers, big, he didn't say much, but he was hard. And at the Tigers, we trained, every training session was, the intensity was the same as, you know, playing a derby match. It was, we had fisticuffs at training. We had blood, we had bleeding, we had fights. I couldn't believe it when I first got there. But that toughness that Martin Johnson led by, which is what made the British and Irish Lions so successful when he was captain. And it certainly made England successful through that period. They won the World Cup, and it certainly made us at the Leicester Tigers very successful.
Excellent. Now, Fleshin, who's a poor Welshman who's trapped in England, so we always have empathy for him. But Fleshin says, how drained were the players after that 95 game when you got back to the changing rooms after winning that trophy?
So I don't think you can ever be drained after winning a game. I think particularly after winning a Rugby World Cup final, you are on a proper high. Even though there was extra time, we when we were flying, long days training, I said to him, you know, surely we should be spending more time on strategy and game plan and skill as opposed to fitness. And he said to me right that day, and that was in like January or February, you know, 3 months before the World Cup, he said the will win the Rugby World Cup. So we were that fit team. So when we got in the change room afterwards, we certainly weren't drained. We were on a massive high. We had to go to a dull banquet, and then we had a big night out. And we had a big night. And we went the whole night. So we definitely weren't drained.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, you'd probably be on that battery will stay not flat for days after that. You'd probably be up for hours. Now, I'm taking a risk here, and I'll just go back and delete this after the fact if I make a mistake. But Corona's boring. Do the alien thing, says Chris. Does Nas okay, so if this is wrong, let me know if this is wrong, because I don't know. It's an inside joke. So yeah. Does Nas Botha have an Acha range now that he's in India? Please ask private South African joke. I don't get that.
I don't get it either, but I'm going to guess that he does not have any other range other than the normal Nas range.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so I don't get that. And Kule Nkotsi said that Japan came as second team after they beat Ireland. That game was amazing. Kule, I would say that a lot of people, Japan became their second team after when they defeated the Springboks there at Brighton at a game that I was at. That was heartbreaking. I'm still in tears over that loss. I think Japan became the second side for a lot of rugby fans. And the Brave Blossoms are just awesome. They play all out. It's a shame the last season because of Corona, they didn't play particularly well. But, you know, in the build-up to the 2019 World Cup, they were brilliant. And people forget they were 4-0 in their pool. They defeated Ireland and Scotland, and convincingly, didn't they, Joel?
100%. Is that in 2015 maybe propelled them to those great victories. And while in Japan, I must tell you, I think Japan were everybody's second team, to be quite honest. But it was wonderful being in the stadium when they were playing. The spirit when, I don't know, South Africa played England in the World Cup final, or New Zealand in the pool game, or when, you know, the US played Tonga, whatever it was, the spirit in the stadium was great. But when Japan, the home team, were playing, the spirit in the stadium was just world class. You know, the fans came out to support every team, but boy, the rugby nation, the rugby understanding fans of Japan came out and supported their team. It was just an amazing occasion every single time that happened. Just to tell you one, just to maybe, you know, I know we're getting close to time and we have to end off, but maybe just to tell you one little story around that Japan game, because when we lost in 2015, I was commentating on that game. And as part of my commentary duties for World Rugby, I did to go into the hospitality before the game and say a few words and go back after the game and, you know, give a summary of what happened in the game. Before the game, I was asked by this wonderful Japanese man who was wearing a red and white cherry blossom blazer. I was asked whether Japan had any chance of beating the Springboks. And I said, absolutely zero. I said, there's absolutely no chance. So it happens in football that the underdog, can win, the favorite can hit the upright, the post 3 or 4 times, the goalkeeper can make, 5 or 6 great saves. The underdog can get one shot on the other side, and there's a big deflection that goes in. Every now and then you get an upset, and the underdog wins in football. I said in rugby, it cannot happen. Japan will not beat the Springboks today. So after the game, I knew I had to go back and eat my words and swallow some real humble pie. I bumped into him as I was walking to the room. I said to him, "Excuse me, sir, please may I borrow your jackets? And can I swap jackets and go up there wearing your jacket, to pay tribute to you and your great team?" And he loaned me his jacket. I went up and I probably ate some proper humble pie, and the fact that I was wearing his jacket, I think, saved my blushes a little bit. In 2019, when the Springboks played Japan in the quarterfinal, I bumped into that man.
Oh.
At the stadium when I was with some, and I bumped into that man in the same. He was wearing the jacket, and I was walking along with my friends, and I was going to go and do commentary. I him and recognized him, and he recognized me. It was like we were brothers brought together by this great game. We hugged each other and danced around in a huddle. It's very difficult to explain. And that is the wonderful game of rugby union. So as much as we lost to Japan in 2015, and it was catastrophic for the Springboks, it was something special for Japan. But most importantly, for me, in my personal capacity, it made me a friend of a man I would never have met otherwise, and made him a friend for life. Very, very special part of this game of rugby union.
No, absolutely. And that's why I've never met a single person I've introduced to the game of rugby union that has not loved it. I mean, not just liked it, but loved it. The 2015 World Cup, my last game was, I think, in Gloucester. The last game was USA-Japan. And I was sitting in the middle of the pitch, but near the top, up by the booth where the coaches go. And after the warm-up, Eddie Jones comes up from Japan. He walks by me, and he says... he walks by, and I see him, and I said, "Hey, Eddie, thanks for signing with the Stormers in Western Province. I'm so excited." Now, obviously, he'd already had signed a deal with England, which wasn't announced yet. So I'm like, "You rat bastard," after that. But I was so disappointed. But I went to dinner before the game, and I was in an Indian restaurant, and there was a bunch of Japanese fans there, and they could barely speak English, and I don't know any Japanese. Just a couple words, mostly from Styx, the band in the 70s, Tomo Arigato, Mr. Roboto, stuff like that. But anyway, but seriously, so I had dinner there, and I met these Japanese, and then they said, "Oh, Japan 2019, Japan," and they gave me little stickers and everything, and I said, "I'll be there," and I did in fact go there. And for me, the 2019 World Cup was such an amazing thing because all the people I met, all the places I interacted with. I mean, remember the guy who would paint his upper body with the jersey of a team for every game? I met him in Kobe after you and I met. I all over the country. He was at all these games I had been at, but I'd never seen him. So we took a photo out there. I was on a train to Kumagaya for one of the games, and I got up to go to the loo, and I'm sitting right next to Sir Bill Beaumont. So we had a conversation. We chatted, took a few photos with him. I saw you and Talon. I met USA players. I had dinner with the USA side after the game against England, I think it was, back at their hotel. That was pretty cool. It was a magical experience. And for me, the nice thing about rugby union, union is a good word because it really does bring people together. It's an amazing game. And I met a young lady at a Starbucks in a local grocery store last night. It was the night before last. And I stopped to get a Starbucks, and I had one of my World Cup from Japan hoodies on. And she says, "Oh, do you like rugby? Do you play rugby?" I said, "Yeah, I played a bit of rugby, but I'm a rugby journalist and a rugby fan." And we started talking. She just took up the game of rugby at university. She's playing. And she says, "My mom was so worried." I said, "Why?" She says, "She thought I'm going to get hurt." And I said, "Well, if you play the game properly, it's a lot less dangerous than, say, football. For instance, one of the reasons why there's so many fewer head injuries is because if you tackle properly, you're not going to injure your head." And I mentioned that I just watched a game in which a player in Major League Rugby made a hit, and he made it properly, but just caught the bad angle, got a bit of a stinger, but he recovered. Whereas in football, people are diving in with those helmets and attacking people, and it's so much more vicious. Rugby is taken head injury much more seriously than NFL, and if you play the game properly. So I said, tell your mom that, if you play the game properly and you play it fair and you don't cheat and play dirty, you're going to be a lot safer than you are playing, say, soccer or something like that. You get a lot more injuries in soccer than you do in rugby. Anyway, but it's a game that brings everybody together, and that's what I love about it, so much about it there, Joel.
Yeah, very much so. And that is the one fear we all have, is that effort is make we want all the kids out there to be playing, boys and girls, and we want the game to grow still. So let's hope that continues.
All right. With that, listen, I'd like to thank you, and hey, I'd like to get you back on when you're in civilization and you have a data connection next time, so we don't get the. We'll get you on there, but it's a pleasure. And look, it was once again, it was a real pleasure getting a chance to meet you in Japan through our intermediary there, Talon, who's a friend of both of ours. And thanks a lot for all you do. One of the questions earlier that people were asking is, are you still involved with South African Rugby Union? I'm not aware that you are, but you are involved with Super Sport among your other business things. But you don't have a role with South African Rugby Union right now, do you?
No, Chris, I don't. I have a number of businesses, or an interest in a number of businesses, and that keeps me busy by day. I moonlight on TV still with Super Sport, so there's no time. There's no time for anything else, to be honest. I am still a very passionate rugby man and a huge supporter of South African rugby, and that will never change.
Well, yeah, I'm right there with you, brother. But Joel Stransky, rugby legend, successful businessman, fantastic commentator. I'll give you, Joel, a chance. Anything you want to share with the audience, just as a closing, maybe an anecdote, or just anything you want to say. This on my news program, it's usually a political topic, so usually somebody wants to say something. But I don't know, maybe just about the game, kind of get people excited, or something you might want to share.
No, so I don't have anything to share really. I just I apologize for the the Wi-Fi connection at times. It's not always stable here on the farm, and we're on the farm at the moment with my father-in-law, and hopefully the Wi-Fi will be a little bit better tomorrow. We move back down to our apartment on the beach in the next few weeks, and I'm a commuter. I work in Joburg and live here on the coast. It's a wonderful life, but most importantly, I still get to experience rugby people. I still get to watch the game and enjoy the game, and it is always nice to meet and chat to ardent rugby fans, whether they are Springbok supporters with a Bok flag in the background wearing their Bok tracksuit top or jersey, or whether they are rugby fans from anywhere else. It's a very, very special game, and we're all very privileged to be a part of it.
Well, thank you, Joel Stransky. Bye-bye, Donkey. Appreciate it. Also, a member of one of the Hall of Fames for sport. That's well done on your part. But thank you so much. You're welcome on the channel anytime. We're happy to have you back, and I'll probably reach out and try to get you to come on again at some point. But thank you very much. Have a lovely evening. It's evening there, and be safe. Thanks a lot, Joel.
Thanks very much, Chris. Thanks for having me on the show. Look forward to next time.
All right, I'm going to put Joel in the waiting room real quick there. If he wants to drop off, he's welcome to do that. If he wants to hang around for me and chat with him. But I'm going to close up and be out done in a moment here, Joel. All right, folks, thanks a lot for tuning in. This was epic. I really enjoyed the conversation with Joel Stransky, rugby legend, South African Springbok number 592. I hope you enjoyed it as well. It was a distinct pleasure to have him on. Please be sure to share this link with folks. Let them know about the interview, because a lot of people apparently weren't aware of it. Thank you for your comments and your questions. I did my best to get to most of them. It's a pleasure to have you guys join me. Take care of yourselves. And this was pretty awesome. Thanks a lot. Also, we got the update on Nas. He's involved in India. I didn't know that. That was interesting to discover. A really interesting conversation. My apologies again for the connection. That's the internet. Sometimes, as he said, he had a little bit of trouble there with the connection. But we did our best, and we soldiered on. And I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you all so much. Boko. There you go. Thanks, everybody, and have a lovely day. I'll debate about whether to have a night owls. I probably have one. But I got lots going on right now, prepping for my trip to Orlando. So thank you, Erica, and everyone else who said it was a great interview. Yeah, it was great. I enjoyed the conversation with him very much. You guys take care, and we'll see you either later or we'll see. Don't be sure to check out my video about why the Ukraine matters to the U.S. A bit of satire and analysis. Cheers, everybody.